Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, October the 24th, 2025. Today there is a square between the Sun and Pluto, and in this video I want to look at this aspect in some detail, and also I want to look at the horoscopes of a few people who I think might be impacted by this square. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, October the 24th, 2025. So here is the chart of today, set for noon, Friday, New York time. So we now have the moon in Sagittarius. So the moon is at 5 degrees 46 Sagittarius. So that blast of Scorpio activity, which is still very much with us, is to an extent starting to subside. We're not going to get four traditional planets in Scorpio again for some time. But anyway, the moon has moved out of Scorpio. Of course, that means that the moon is no longer in a sign in which it is fallen. It's in a fire sign. And, that's also a good thing because, there isn't so much fire around at the moment because now, even Neptune has left Aries, but we've got Moon in Sagittarius. That perhaps provides us with a bit of energy, and we can start to perhaps see things in a different way. Not quite so much emotion flying around, though. We shouldn't underestimate the fact that the Sun is in Scorpio, and the Sun is making a square to Pluto. So Sun square Pluto is, the headline aspect of the day. I think it is probably the most important aspect of the day. You could argue that Sun square Scorpio has a Scorpio feel, has a Sun square, but Sun square Pluto has a Scorpio feel to it. Although I'm a bit unhappy about mixing the meanings of signs and houses and aspects. Sun square Pluto is not the same as Scorpio, but still with Sun square Pluto, one does think of the intensity of the aspect and the obsession with certain things. And it can be an obsessive aspect. As far as myself is concerned, I've got Sun square Pluto. It may not feel like it, but I do have Sun in Gemini square Pluto in Virgo. So Sun square Pluto, this Sun square Pluto, it's in fixed signs, and so it can be quite intense. Once we decide to get involved in something, we might throw everything we've got into it, and there might be just a single pointedness to that Sun square Pluto, just throwing everything else aside and just focusing on one thing to the exclusion of all else, and it may be difficult to respond to other things. So we can be intent on achieving a particular set of goals, or maybe just a single goal, but things might happen, and maybe we need a little bit of flexibility so that we can really see things through to a successful conclusion. And aside from that, we've got Mercury trine Jupiter. So Mercury is at 24 Scorpio, it's trine Jupiter, and really Mercury is starting to move towards a grand trine. I mean, there is effectively a grand trine here. You've got Mercury in Scorpio, trine Jupiter, moving towards a trine to Saturn. I think that Mercury will be probably on the midpoint not until tomorrow, but as we move into the weekend, there is very much a grand trine going on. It's not just involving Mercury, it involves Jupiter in Cancer, Saturn in Pisces, Mercury and Mars in Scorpio. So there might be less water around than there was yesterday because the moon has moved out of a water sign, but now we very much have a grand trine in water signs, and so the emotional side of things really can't be neglected. Another aspect we've got is moon opposition Uranus. So moon in Sagittarius, as it moves into Sagittarius, it makes an opposition to Uranus, quite a short-lived aspect, but while it's exact, things might happen. There might be a feeling of some annoyance in certain quarters, And yeah, we shouldn't assume that everything is going to completely go to plan. And that's a reminder if we're getting caught up in that Sun square Pluto. Yeah, Sun square Pluto is intent to achieve particular results, but Moon opposition Uranus could present a counterpoint, something else that we need to consider. So that's the picture for New York. If we set the chart for noon on October the 24th. By the way, the moon goes into Sagittarius at 5:19 a.m. London time if you're interested. So if you're in California, for example, the moon will have gone into Sagittarius late last night. And if you're in Sydney, Australia, or in Australasia in general, here is a chart for Sydney at noon on October the 24th. So at noon, the moon is in Scorpio. So if you are in Australasia, then the first part of the day, until perhaps, 3, 4 in the afternoon, I haven't got the precise time, perhaps later if you're in New Zealand, the first part of the day, the moon will be in Scorpio. So what I said about Sagittarius doesn't apply straight away, but in the end, the moon will move into Scorpio. The moon will move into Sagittarius. So you may very much experience that changeover if you're in Australasia. The first part of the day may be more emotional, more intense than the last part of the day. And then there is the heliocentric view. So I haven't actually set up the heliocentric chart, so let me quickly show you the heliocentric chart. Here it is. Okay, so looking at things from a perspective of the Sun, putting the Sun in the center of the solar system. So Mercury is at 28 degrees Capricorn, and it is moving to a trine with Uranus. So that means Mercury geocentrically Mercury moving to a trine to Jupiter, heliocentrically moving towards a trine with Uranus. And so Mercury trine Uranus and Mercury sextile Saturn, it could be about trying to stir things up, trying to do something that is unique, but also having a degree of discipline. Mercury sextile Saturn, it's not enough to cause trouble. It's not enough to get everyone's attention. One has to think, what does one do then? How does one make something more permanent? It's not good enough just to cause a temporary fuss, to be in the spotlight for a few seconds. We have to think about the follow through, and maybe Mercury sextile Saturn is going to help us with this. And you'll notice that the Earth is in Taurus because the Sun's gone into Scorpio. So when the Sun goes into Scorpio, the Earth moves into Taurus, and at this time we've also got the Earth square Pluto. Again, we've got Sun square Pluto geocentrically, Earth square Pluto heliocentrically, and it's an identical aspect but just seen from a different perspective. And Earth square Pluto is maybe more descriptive because we're reminded that Earth, we are on the planet Earth, and maybe there are big changes going on. Although we have to remember that the Earth will square Pluto twice a year in the same way that the Sun will square Pluto geocentrically twice a year. So in itself, it is not an especially dramatic aspect because it does happen relatively frequently. But still, when we think about geocentrically all that stuff in Scorpio and the fact that Mercury-Mars conjunction is still around. So that does perhaps add to some of the underlying intensity we've got in this geocentric Scorpio season. So let me now turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, October the 24th, 2025. Aries, you may experience something of a change, maybe something of a relief. You have had all these planets in Scorpio, a sign which is ruled by Mars, like Aries, but it just might have become just too much. It was just starting to really weigh in on you, and it wasn't a time when you could be your usual happy-go-lucky Aries. There were maybe complicated things that you had to consider, that you had to take into account of, and it wasn't always easy. Maybe it isn't always easy having to be complicated, having to make things complicated. And still you've got Mercury making a conjunction to Mars in Scorpio. I mean, okay, it's good that Mars, your ruler, is in Scorpio in one sense, because it's in a sign where it is strong, because Mars rules Scorpio. But sometimes it just became just too much. There were things you just wanted to do in your own way, without any pressure, without having to worry too much about complicated emotions. As an Aries, this is not really what you wanted. It's not what you want. And with Mercury conjunct Mars, there are things that continue to make you angry, that make you annoyed, that you want to express, and you've been looking for the right way to express yourself. And now we've got the moon moving into Sagittarius. So moving into a fire sign, it finally feels that there's some familiarity, that there are things happening which you understand, which you can relate to, and you have an opportunity to be yourself, perhaps even to be your happy-go-lucky self. Well, no, I wouldn't really say that Aries in itself is a particularly happy-go-lucky sign. Is any sign happy-go-lucky? But you certainly like to have your freedom. You like to be able to do what you want, when you want, in your own way. And so this this moon in Sagittarius might feel different. It might feel that finally you've got room to breathe. And the moon is making an opposition to Uranus. Now, normally I would have said that moon opposition Uranus is a difficult energy, because it's quite unpredictable. But that's what you need right now. You need to do something spontaneously, not feel constrained either by external forces, other people in your way, perhaps you thinking that other people are being too complicated, perhaps you being oversensitive, and that is a possibility. I mean, it's always good to be considerate, but sometimes one can be too considerate. And maybe, Aries, you're losing some of your excess sensitivity now, and that moon opposition Uranus could give you a chance to demonstrate this, doing something, saying something that wasn't necessarily expected, but still it did have to be said. Now, the main aspect going on today, well, what is the main aspect? And there are two big aspects going on: Sun square Pluto and Mercury trine Uranus. And maybe you should concentrate on the Mercury trine Uranus, because Mars is also making a trine to Uranus. And okay, I know it's in water signs, but still, even though it is in water signs, it is Mercury, it is Jupiter. It is about you being able to perhaps explain how you feel. And I still think that your emotions are strong, maybe too strong for your own liking, but you can start to explain it and get people to listen, and also to put it in a broader perspective. Sometimes it can be difficult to get people to understand. Maybe they just think you're being sort of weird, or perhaps you're worrying about the wrong things. But now people will understand if you make the effort to explain. And once you do make that effort to explain, it could be that Mercury trine Jupiter starts to feed into that Sun square Pluto aspect, and that Sun square Pluto aspect is a reminder perhaps that your various sort of networks of contacts and friendships is sometimes in a place where it becomes rather boring, The same old people doing the same old things, and Sun square Pluto perhaps gives you an opportunity to challenge it all, because really in some respects that's what Pluto in Aquarius is about. You having a look at everyone around you, your friends, how you fit into society, and then Sun making a square to Pluto in Aquarius is the challenge, and your own deep feelings about the way things should be going. And so a bit of confrontation today, even though the moon is out of Scorpio, even though Mercury and the Mercury Mars aspect is starting to separate, a bit of confrontation in the right areas might actually be a good thing. Taurus. Some of that concentration in Scorpio that I was talking about yesterday is beginning to break up. It's not quite so strong. You have the moon moving out of Scorpio into Sagittarius, and the moon in Sagittarius, as far as you're concerned, is not such a bad thing. It does allow you to get more of a perspective. I think that had been perhaps a problem over the last couple of days with this concentration on Scorpio. You were perhaps thinking about maybe other people and their needs, and how other people could have been limiting your freedom. Having to worry about what other people want, what other people need all the time isn't much fun. And I'm not saying that necessarily was the case. It rather depends on your situation. But now that the moon has changed sign, moved into Sagittarius, it's now in mutual reception to Jupiter. You perhaps have a chance to think for yourself and act in ways that are in your own best interests, and you realize that a bit of independence is important, and independence is always important. If you're a Taurian, you have your own ways of looking at things, and you can try your hardest to accommodate other people, but there are limits. And one aspect we do have, well, we got two actually non-lunar aspects that may be relevant to you, and that's Sun square Pluto and Mercury trine Jupiter. And these aspects in a way are very different. Sun square Pluto is a more heavy duty influence, and with this Sun square Pluto, you may be thinking about what you want to do, perhaps what your ambitions are, what the next stage actually is. And then that Sun square Pluto, well, the Sun represents everything that could be holding you back, or everything you might think is holding you back. And it might be people who you regard as just being very stuck in their ways. And that might be the story you're telling yourself, that if only other people were more reasonable, were more flexible, things would just be so much easier. And there's then the possibility that you might be projecting. When we're thinking about planets in your opposite sign, you're a Taurus, we're talking about Scorpio planets, we always need to consider the possibility of projecting. You pushing things onto other people, you assuming that other people have particular views and have a particular stance, which they don't necessarily have. In fact, we may be talking about your own stance. So that Sun in Scorpio in your opposite sign could represent your own stubbornness and your own inability to countenance change that is perhaps holding you back. So if you do feel in any way stuck, particularly in terms of your ambitions or your career, if you do feel stuck, then don't necessarily blame other people. It could be all about your own resistance to change. But the Sun square Pluto is dynamic. It does have a dynamism. And if you can move beyond that, and if you can decide that you're going to get over the issue, whatever it might be, whether it really is another person, whether it is your own resistance to change, I think that we can see a transformative energy at work, which could be beneficial. And at the same time, we have got Mercury making a trine to Jupiter. And this Mercury trine Jupiter, in a way, has a different message to Sun square Pluto. Mercury trine Jupiter is a very communicative aspect. Mercury is in Scorpio. It's in your opposite sign. And it's trine Jupiter. And Jupiter, don't forget, is in mutual reception with Moon in Sagittarius. So this indicates to me, Taurus, that there is a way to really tell people how you feel, and also to tell yourself how you feel. It's always good to think about that inner dialogue. Maybe the inner dialogue needs to be the beginning of things, and then that inner dialogue becomes a dialogue with other people, with the people around you. And so if something is unsaid and it needs to be discussed, then now might be the time to do it. And you can discuss things with power, and people will listen, but at the same time you will have the ability to understand what is bothering other people. And I think that you're going to be very good at presenting yourself in the right way. I mean, you can be strong, you can be ever so slightly disruptive, but you're not going to be too disruptive. So I think that if you are mature and you're able to deal with things as they are, and you don't project too much, then I think that it can be quite a good day. Gemini. Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter, and ideally we should just be focusing on that trine. The trine in astrology is a fortunate aspect. It suggests that things really are moving, or rather they can move. And additionally, Jupiter is a fortunate planet. It's Jupiter. It's in Cancer. It's exalted in Cancer. Right now it's in mutual reception with the Moon in Sagittarius. When I say mutual reception, I mean that the Moon and Jupiter are in each other's signs. So this strong Jupiter is making a trine to Mercury. So that can make you lucky. And that might be something that you don't immediately recognize. Luck is always an issue with Geminis, or it can often be an issue with Geminis, because Geminis can analyze things a lot. They can sort of analyze things to such an extent where the magic can be removed. Where is the luck? It's like, I suppose, watching a kettle boil. Although I suppose as I get older, as time moves faster, kettles boil more and more quickly. I mean, that's how it works, isn't it? But supposedly watching kettles boil and watching paint dry is pretty much the same kind of thing. And it's like with luck. If you're sitting there waiting to get lucky, then it might not just be a long wait. It might be a wait for something that something never happens, because the mere act of waiting for luck prevents the luck from ever coming about. But this Mercury trine Jupiter, if you do the right things, I do think that you're going to be able to create your own luck, regardless of what you're doing, what you're thinking, regardless of your expectations. And the question is, how do you create your own luck? Well, one way of creating your own luck is to put in the effort. Yeah, it is a time for putting in the effort. Doing things which you regard as being, frankly, tedious. The things you absolutely don't want to do. You kind of know they have to be done. And what you're doing by being so by being so persistent, yeah, even if it's just really boring, you're just creating spaces, and that's what it's all about. I think to be lucky, you very often have to create the space for that luck to actually manifest, and so that might be a lot of what today is about. Just working away bit by bit, not looking for any rewards, perhaps not even enjoying yourself, but just having a grim determination to make sure that each task is completed. And yeah, it's not something you want to do, but it's something that you should be doing. Okay, I don't want to tell you that you should be doing anything. I mean, you can do what you like, really, but I'm just suggesting that maybe you should be sort of quite focused and take an incremental approach, not looking for sort of immediate advances, sudden opportunities. I don't think it's quite like that. And at the same time, Gemini, don't feel that you have to do everything on your own. Don't feel that assistance isn't available if you need it. I mean, Mercury is trine Jupiter, and also you've got Moon is now moving into Sagittarius. Sagittarius is your opposite sign, and this does indicate that you're not alone, that if you want assistance, you can ask for it, and you might not want to ask for it, but I feel confident that people are available. I mean, they may not be physically available, but you've got a phone, you've got the internet, you've got internet forums. You hit a problem, you ask a question, and I think you'll get a good answer, and then you get your answer, and then you can move to the next task. And of course, if you feel that you're stuck, then that is a good reason to just stop what you're doing. Well, this is too boring. Not just boring, I can't do it, so I'm just going to stay where I am. But maybe you can just continue on, and with the right level of help. There's also a possibility, Gemini, that you hit an issue, and then you persuade yourself, well, you're going to stop there because what else can you do? You can't move to the next stage. Well, you can move to the next stage. Sometimes things move at different paces. Maybe you do step 1, you can't do step 2, then you move to step 3, and then you move back to step 2, and then you can move on to step 4, and that is the way forward. And as far as relationships are concerned, I'm supposed to talk about relationships in these horoscopes. I think that many people coming to horoscope readings expect me to talk about it. I don't always. But, Mercury is trine Jupiter. Mercury is you. Mercury is ruler of Gemini. Jupiter is ruler of Sagittarius. And so with Mercury trine Jupiter, that would indicate that relationships can really move swimmingly even. And Jupiter is strongly placed in that, with that mutual reception in Jupiter, with that mutual reception with the Moon. So, I'm confident, Gemini, that the various relationships in your life, if you give it your best shot, that they can work really well, and you shouldn't underestimate anyone. As far as who has the power, who is in the best position. In many cases, the other person is in the better position. They perhaps have more knowledge than you. Short term, I mean, no one really has more knowledge than a Gemini, do they? Gemini is the most intelligent sign of the 12, isn't it? The most knowledgeable. But at least temporarily, it might feel that someone else knows more than you, and that's nothing to be worried about. Take advantage of the opportunity, regardless of what it is you want, regardless of what the relationship is about. And in certain cases, you may be able to benefit financially from the right contact with the right person. So Gemini, there may be a sense today that partnerships are important. Okay, you don't have to be in a partnership, but if you are working with another person, then I think that is going to help you in terms of making the most of the day. Cancer. There is a changeover going on. Moon moving, out of Scorpio into Sagittarius. Now, this change, the moon moving from Scorpio to Sagittarius, in some respects is quite substantial, because the moon is moving from being in a sign where it is fallen. The moon is weak in Scorpio traditionally because it's fallen in this sign, and then it moves to Sagittarius. In general, Sagittarius is quite a good sign for the moon to be in. I mean, William Lilly in Christian Astrology, he when he's talking about the void of course, I think when he talks about the void of course moon, I think he says that I think he says something like that the moon can work when it's in Pisces and Sagittarius. Well, why does William Lilly choose a Pisces and Sagittarius as those two signs? Remember, he's writing in the 17th century. Well, probably because Pisces and Sagittarius are two signs ruled by Jupiter. So even though the moon is not exalted or in its own sign in Sagittarius, it does have a strength. And this time around we've got Jupiter in Cancer. So when the moon moves into Sagittarius, it's in mutual reception with Jupiter. So you could say that there is a big movement going on. The moon gains a lot of dignity. Although I don't think that's necessarily completely how you experience it, because as a Scorpio, I think you're quite able to deal with the moon in Scorpio. So, for example, if you're in Australasia and Australia, New Zealand, and the moon is going to be in Scorpio for most of the day, I don't think that's much of a problem, because the moon is in a water sign. I mean, you can handle that. But if you're somewhere else, if you're in the Americas, moon is in Europe, moon is in Sagittarius, it's not a problem. You move from, I think, strength to strength, but it's perhaps a different strength. And with the moon in Sagittarius, it means that you can decide what matters, and I think that is really important. Cancer, there are very many things you could be doing, and you have to decide what is best given the situation, given the time you're living in. Well, the day you're living, it's a Friday. Given Friday, what is your priority? And other people may not be able to spot that priority. They may tell you that you should be doing this, and they might get the priority wrong. You know where the priority lies, and because you know where the priority lies, that means, Cancer, that you're going to be able to make the right choices. So if you find that you think that something is important, and someone else says that something is more important, then I think it's a situation when you should be trusting your own feelings. And you're a Cancer, usually you can trust your own feelings, and so do make the right choices, and don't allow yourself to be swayed by outside opinions. At the same time, we have a trine aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. In fact, we've got a grand trine going on now. Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter, and it's making a trine to Saturn. In fact, Mars is involved with this grand trine as well. So we're in a grand trine situation, grand trine in water signs, and one planet that is involved in this grand trine is Jupiter. Jupiter in Cancer, Jupiter in your own sign, Jupiter very strong in your own sign because it's exalted. And so I think that this grand trine, Cancer, could be a big opportunity for you. I think that things really are starting to move your way, and you don't have to make much of an effort. I know that effort is supposed to be something desirable, that everything should be difficult. We try very hard. There's a lot of sweat and tears, and in the end we get there. But if something is easy, then one should go for it. Not always, but I think now with this grand trine, it could be that something that you had thought was going to be difficult is actually pretty straightforward. Maybe you had been sort of building up on it. It's like the lid on the jar. Suddenly it becomes easy. Why is it easy? Well, maybe someone else loosened the lid, but that doesn't matter. The point is you're able to take the lid off the jar very easily and very quickly, and you're not going to ask too many questions. You're going to take the credit for it, even if it really was someone else, the last person that tried, they're the one that loosened it. It doesn't matter. The point is Cancer, as you move into the weekend, as Friday turns to Saturday, things should really run very smoothly. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing, particularly if you take a chaotic approach. If you're doing something, or perhaps if you're doing something dangerous or something that could just get out of control and there isn't a focus. And that's the thing about grand trines. You do need to have a bit of a focus, because you can just find that just everything moves quickly. Well, it's like opening sort of Pandora's box. There's no resistance. Nothing stops. And there could be no resistance, not just in terms of your external environment, but the way your mind is working, the way you're feeling, the way one emotion morphs into another emotion. Ideally, there does need to be a focus. So Cancer, if you want to make the most of this grand trine, it's very important that you ask yourself what really matters, what's important to you. What would you like to achieve over the next couple of days? And don't think about resistance, don't think about things being impossible. What would you like to achieve? Because this grand trine should really help you. And additionally, this grand trine is fun. It should be fun. It should be about you enjoying yourself, doing something that is important to you, but also having the discipline. That's the important point. And perhaps what really makes this grand trine particularly effective for you is the fact that the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter, and the moon provides a contrast. Moon in Sagittarius in Jupiter's sign. It doesn't just provide a contrast, it does strangely provide a bit of discipline. Now, you might not associate moon in Sagittarius with discipline, but you have, as I said right at the beginning of this piece on Cancer, you have an idea of priority. Don't forget that. You know what matters. You know what's important. You know what can be left until next week or next month. So if you keep in mind your priorities, then I think you're going to be able to make the most of this grand trine energy over the next couple of days. Leo. The big aspect, Leo, is a square aspect between the Sun and Pluto. So we've got Sun in Scorpio, square Pluto in Aquarius, and the question is, how is it going to work? Now, you could say that Pluto is impacting the Sun. You are the Sun. The Sun is in Scorpio. So you might respond to this aspect by being very, very focused on what you regard as being important to you. And I'm not just talking about things in an external way. You perhaps want to achieve particular things, get particular things done. But it also could be things that are emotionally important to you, things that you almost regard as being sacred. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having an idea, having a concept of sanctity and regarding things as being special. But Leo, there is a danger that you might make things too special, and you might take things just too seriously, and too much seriousness can be a problem. You might miss out on other things going on, things that are important, that perhaps need your attention, and it just might be very easy for you to just feel that you just have to shut all the doors, shut out the world. Anything that might threaten your imagined security needs to be resisted. So that Sun square Pluto could be a problem, and it could make you just too intense for your own good. And maybe, Leo, you need to lighten up, ever so slightly, and you can. The moon is moving into Sagittarius, and that moon moving into Sagittarius provides a much needed balance. And when the moon moves into Sagittarius, the moon is obviously moving into a fire sign, and it's a fire sign that obviously is about variety. It's about action. It's about perhaps not thinking too much, not worrying too much. And that moon in Sagittarius is in mutual reception to Jupiter in Cancer, because the moon and Cancer are in each other's signs. And so that moon in Sagittarius gives you an opportunity to see things in a different way, perhaps to, get over yourself. I don't mean that in a sort of a dismissive way, and I don't want to sort of dismiss the way you feel, and some things I understand are important to you, but you've got to be sort of looking at other possibilities. And if you just are focused on one thing and you don't see other things that could be done, perhaps other ways of enjoying yourself, that would be a shame, and you just don't want to get stuck. And I think I'm saying that not just to you, Leo. Sun square Pluto can be an aspect that is stuck. It just gets bogged down. And Leo, I think that is something that you've really got to resist. But I think you can resist. And perhaps the main thing with Moon and Sagittarius is to do something that you feel is a real expression of who you are, and you feel confident about it. You're not defensive. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify it. You can just be yourself. And if you're criticized or you think you're being criticized, it doesn't really matter, because you're on the right track. And so maybe the message, Leo, is to take yourself seriously up to a point, but perhaps at some level you need to lighten up. Virgo. Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury is in Scorpio, and it's making a trine to Jupiter. I think that this trine to Jupiter is, it's a great aspect. And Mercury is also making a trine to Saturn. So really, Mercury is getting involved in a grand trine. And so this Mercury Jupiter, Mercury Saturn trine means perhaps that you can really get the balance right. This Mercury trine, so the trine to Saturn takes place over the weekend. The Mercury trine Jupiter takes place today. But still, you're feeling both aspects, and so you're feeling, I think, quite good about yourself. And whatever's on your mind, I think that you shouldn't have any problems getting it out getting it out into the open. People are ready to listen to you. Whatever your message might be, you can deliver it, and you can deliver your message in a way that is quite spontaneous, but it's also very serious. There is a seriousness to you, but you're not being too serious. And if there's something to be said, then I think that there should be no problems getting people to understand. But maybe nothing has to be said. Maybe it's a good day for trying to enjoy people's company, not thinking that you're alone or that you have to be alone. Now, you might think that you have to be alone because if you spend time with other people, they might in some respects limit your freedom. Their influence might be restrictive. But I don't think that's the case. I think that you can certainly benefit from other people's guidance. I mean, we do have Saturn and the North Node in Pisces, and that is where you should be going, the North Node. And so with North Node and Saturn in Pisces, your opposite sign, that is suggesting that you've always got to give people a chance. Try to understand their view, and Mercury is starting to make that aspect to Saturn, and to Saturn. I mean, Mercury has already made an aspect to the North Node. That was quite a few days ago, but it is coming together, and you really can cooperate with other people and also benefit from them. So I don't know what you're doing today, but if you can, if possible, be sociable and enjoy other people's company, I think that that will feel good. And additionally, Jupiter is a lucky planet. So Mercury trine Jupiter could just make you lucky. And Jupiter is especially strong at the moment because it is in mutual reception with the Moon. So the Moon and Jupiter are in each other's signs, Jupiter in Cancer, Moon in Sagittarius. And so with this Mercury trine Jupiter, luck can come in many forms, and it could come from other people. Maybe there's something you want, something you're looking for, you can't find it yourself, and maybe another person can provide it. And while you're at it, do think about where it's all going. When I say where it's all going, I'm thinking about where are you going? In the distant future I'm talking about. I'm not talking about over the next year, but over the next decade, 2 decades, where are you going? And that is perhaps a question for many Virgos. And they're thinking about this. I think they've been thinking about this on and off since the summer, since the early summer, ever since Jupiter went into Cancer, and it's not always easy. And perhaps part of a problem Virgo can have is being over analytical, not always seeing the big picture, but you're starting to see the big picture. You're being challenged to see the big picture with Jupiter in Cancer. And with Mercury trine Jupiter, I would suggest that you monitor your thoughts and your ideas very carefully, and also monitor the coincidences you have, or apparent coincidences, things happening which lead to you having a realization, and one realization leads to another realization, and you might get an idea about the way you'd like things to be. And if you do today have a strong feeling about the way you'd like things to be, the way you'd like your future to be, then that might be a sure sign that you're onto something. Now, if you just do nothing in a few days' time, you might forget that insight. So if you do have an insight about what you want, Virgo, then maybe you should remember it or write it down. Don't forget it. Try to in some way hold on to it. And finally, with this Mercury trine Jupiter, it should be quite fortunate as far as relationships are concerned. I think that the various one-to-one relationships in your life should work pretty well. Mercury's it's not just Mercury's trine Jupiter; it's also Mercury's trine Saturn. As I said, Mercury is in a grand trine relationship with Jupiter and Saturn. So I think that you can greatly benefit from other people's influence, and the various relationships you're in should work pretty well. And I think that by and large you can benefit from them, and you shouldn't feel that it has to always be you making the decisions. Sometimes it's just best to let other people make the decisions. Other people have their own ideas, and these ideas might be very sound. And so at the very least, Virgo, you should hear people out, because I think they're going to be worth listening to. Libra. From a financial perspective, there are still a lot of planets in Scorpio. I know that the moon is leaving Scorpio, but we've still got Sun, Mars and Mercury in this sign. And Scorpio, it's a fixed sign. And being a fixed sign, that perhaps relates to what you have and what you are holding on to. And so, Libra, you might be thinking that perhaps from a financial view, something is not entirely right, and that it's worth giving it your attention. And so if you do find yourself thinking about money or worrying about money, I don't think that you should be embarrassed about it. In fact, it shows that you are thinking about the right things. And also, the Sun is square Pluto, and Sun square Pluto is an aspect that can be quite focused. It can sometimes be even a bit obsessive. And so, if you are obsessing about money or what you have, what you don't have, then don't be embarrassed about it. It's good. It's good that you are thinking about your own interests. And also, the moon is leaving Scorpio. It's moving into Sagittarius. And so with the moon moving into Sagittarius, that gives you a chance to be more open about your concerns. If you have any concerns, it may be Friday, it might be the end of a week, but that doesn't mean to say that you have to do nothing. You have to wait till next week. If you've got a concern, talk about it. And the moon in Sagittarius, in mutual reception to Jupiter, should allow you, Libra, to be very clear about what is bothering you. Tell everyone, and there's a good chance that it can be put right. But it's not just looking at things from a negative and defensive perspective. There is a positive side to it. You can start to think about your ambitions and your financial ambitions even. How would you like things to be? And what can you do right now to make them happen? Remembering that arguably the main aspect of the day isn't the Sun square Pluto. It may be Mercury trine Jupiter. Mercury trine Jupiter, it's a fantastic aspect. But from your perspective, this Mercury trine Jupiter is quite a materialistic aspect. So it's a time, Libra, when you can really get yourself together and really articulate things in a way that other people get. And so, if you're working or if you've got your own business, then today could be important. And I would really urge you to make the most of that Mercury trine Jupiter. In fact, it's not just Mercury trine Jupiter. Mercury's starting to make an aspect to Saturn. It makes a trine to Saturn over the weekend. So we've got a grand trine in water signs in parts of the sky which from a Libran perspective are very materialistic. And so you might think, Libra, that something is really difficult, that you can't get what you want, that people aren't going to listen to you, that if you want to be taken seriously, if you want to get one of your ambitions off the ground, you might think it's just all impossible, it's too difficult, and you've left it too late. Well, that would not be true. So if you make some effort and not much effort to get things going, to get things moving, then you should be able to do it. And don't forget, Venus is still in Libra. Venus is moving into the central part of Libra. Venus is your ruling planet. It's in Libra. It's in its own sign. So while all this is going on, you can be very charming. You know how to present yourself, and so you should have absolutely no problems, getting things to move your way. So Libra, don't underestimate yourself. You may not immediately stand out as someone who is super important and is super powerful, you don't stand out necessarily, but perhaps that's an advantage. You just have a natural ease to you and you can make things happen. And really, Libra, there's no need to be worried about anything. Because if you are worried about something, particularly on a material level, you have the tools needed to solve the problem. Scorpio. Sun square Pluto. I mean, that's one of the big aspects of the day. And this Sun square Pluto certainly has an impact on you. I mean, after all, the Sun is in Scorpio and it's square Pluto. And it could be with this aspect, Sun square Pluto, that you are taking yourself pretty seriously. You regard yourself as an important person. You've definitely got something to contribute. You expect to be taken very seriously, and you're not really in the mood for compromise. You know, if something matters to you, you're just going to hold on to it. At least that's going to be your first inclination. And the question is that a good thing? It might be a good thing. You know, if something really matters and you really need to see something through, perhaps you're reaching the conclusion of something you've been working on for a long time, yeah, you've got to see it through, and you don't want to be distracted. But it is possible that you can't see the wood for the trees. You get so focused on something with Sun square Pluto, or the focus may not be positive, it might be negative. It might be that you become incredibly defensive. And if you're too defensive, that would spoil things. If you're just too focused on your basic security, making sure that everything is in the right place, making sure nothing threatens you, if you're too focused, then that perhaps would be a shame, because it might actually in the end mean that you lose your effectiveness, you lose your cutting edge, because you're too concentrated on yourself. And so ask yourself whether you're taking something too far, because it is quite an extreme aspect, this Sun square Pluto. And this Sun square Pluto, it's not the only thing going on today. I mean, I know that it is a headline aspect. On the thumbnail of this video, I've put Sun square Pluto, but I could equally have put Mercury trine Jupiter. Mercury is moving through your sign. It is trine Jupiter. And Mercury trine Jupiter, it's a great aspect. And it's an aspect but perhaps allows you to move above and beyond. And so perhaps if you want to make the most of this Sun square Pluto, you have to kind of balance it with Mercury trine Jupiter. So we've got two different forces here, Scorpio. We've got the force represented by Sun square Pluto that is encouraging you to really hold firm, hold onto what you have and be quite defensive. And then we've got Mercury trine Jupiter, different message. It's asking you to look at things in a different way. It's asking you to go beyond your own material reality, beyond your immediate sphere of interest, and to look at things from a wider perspective, and look at how perhaps you're leading your life and how other people are leading their lives, and how this links with what's going on in the world. And with that perspective, you might then realize that some things are just not worth worrying about too much. And so it's important, of course, Sun square Pluto, that you do hold on to what matters, that you do look after your basic security needs. But yeah, you can take it too far. And if you get the balance right, then I think it can be a fantastic day. So there is an element of choice here, and we shouldn't forget that there is a grand trine in water signs. So Mercury is trine Jupiter, and Mercury is moving towards a trine of Saturn. And Saturn perhaps allows you to take control in a constructive way. So it's not just Mercury trine Saturn, Mercury trine Jupiter, being perhaps optimistic, seeing all that is possible. Saturn allows you to bring things down to earth and do things in such a way that doesn't really compromise you. So maybe, Scorpio, the key to this Friday is really having faith in yourself. You might think that some of your security needs are not being looked after, but I think they are being looked after. I think you can trust yourself, Scorpio, to make sure that everything is right, that you have paid attention to everything. And once you've got that trust, you can move on, and you can sort of move beyond your immediate sphere and start incorporating other things and getting a perspective. And it's going to be a very useful perspective. It's a perspective that is going to sort of really carry you forward and allow you to make the most of your potential. Sagittarius, the moon is moving into your sign, and you have the moon moving into your sign. I hope that you're feeling better. I'm not saying you've been feeling too bad, but it's perhaps been an issue. There hasn't been anything in a fire sign. We've just had Neptune has left Aries. We haven't even got Neptune in Aries. So there's been absolutely no fire. Okay, you might count Chiron in Aries, but I don't think I would. So moon moving into Sagittarius is, I think for you, is something that is quite welcome. Perhaps it gives you the energy that you have been looking for, striving for, and it just hasn't been there. But now you've got it, and you should find that there is more movement and more possibilities. And possibilities is what matters, particularly if you're a Sagittarian. Now, when the moon moves into Sagittarius, it makes a mutual reception to Jupiter. Jupiter is your ruler, Jupiter's in Cancer, and so moon and Jupiter in each other's signs, that just makes you feel good. And it allows you to move beyond some of your current sort of worries and concerns. There are some things that are bothering you that you're thinking very hard about. You don't necessarily want to let go of them. You don't want to discuss them. But moon moving into Sagittarius gives you the opportunity to move things forward, and you start to see what can be done. And maybe that's been a problem in the recent past. It just felt that there wasn't the opportunity to do everything that you wanted to do, and that could have been quite frustrating. But now things are happening. I mean, not everyone is going to necessarily understand. When the moon moves into Sagittarius, it does make an opposition to Uranus, and this moon opposition Uranus may say something about you and other people. And this moon Uranus opposition is across the main axis of your solar chart, so certain relationships may change. On the surface, this change may not be for the better. It could be that someone does something unexpected. Maybe it's you doing something that's unexpected, and there could be some kind of short-term disagreement, but I wouldn't take it too seriously. I hope you don't take it too seriously, and I also hope that the other person doesn't take it too seriously. It shouldn't be the case. I think with this moon opposition Uranus, it may be that you respond to something in a way that is just a little bit over the top, a bit of exaggeration. But maybe you feel you need to exaggerate. The moon having been in Scorpio all this time, it's just an expression of your exuberance, the fact that the moon is in your own sign. And perhaps what is going to sort of mitigate this is the fact that Mercury is trine Jupiter. Again, Jupiter's your ruler. Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. So Mercury trine Jupiter does indicate to me that the various relationships in your life should be working pretty well. I mean, Mercury and Jupiter are in trine, And so this trine is somewhat understated because it's in water signs. Mercury in Scorpio, Jupiter in Cancer. It's not directly linked to that moon in Sagittarius. So even though you are quite exuberant today, okay, it might be tomorrow, it kind of depends where you are, but certainly by the end of the day, even if you're in Australasia, the moon will be in Sagittarius. But there is an exuberance, but that doesn't mean to say that you've lost your sensitivity. And the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter. Mercury is trine Jupiter. So you do have the ability to understand what is happening and to be able to relate to people in a way that is sensitive and is fairly natural. And so a bit of exuberance might cause a few problems, but nothing lasting. I think that whatever you do, you'll be able to normalize things, and so that is good news. And certain relationships, they may develop almost under the radar. You may just have a natural sympathy with people, and they have a natural sympathy with you, which is quite understated. There's nothing overt going on, but perhaps under the surface, you'll find that you and certain other people are finding new lines of communication, and perhaps lines of communication that to an extent are working on an emotional level. So I think that looks pretty good, and I think that you have the ability to be to be subtle where necessary. So I think that the moon in Sagittarius is not going to completely change things, because there's still this Scorpio emphasis, and I think that Scorpio emphasis is going to keep you grounded. And additionally, there is a grand trine. Mercury makes a trine to Jupiter, and then Mercury makes a trine to Saturn, and that is a great stabilizing influence. So perhaps you can express yourself, you can be yourself, but not to the extent where you cause complete chaos. I think you will know when to stop. So overall, Sagittarius, I think that you can bring things into balance. So if there are temporary imbalances, I think you can act quickly to resolve the issue, and that's good for you, and I think it's also good for everyone around you. Capricorn, there's always this ebb and flow, isn't there? Sometimes you're really in the center of things, making things happen, people looking to you for leadership. There are other times where you seem to be sidelined. I mean, you're not sidelined, but you're just not getting so much attention. And, maybe now, at least, today, Friday, you may feel that you are on the fringes of things, that you're not in the center, you're not the one always making the decisions, particularly in a social situation. And that's probably fine. I think you're quite happy to let things run their course for the moment. I mean, you still have to keep an eye on things. You're not going to ignore things. You're not going to just allow everything to run its chaotic course to the detriment of everyone. So you're ready to intervene if necessary. But I think in an ideal world, Capricorn, you would just let things run, at least today. And that might be all there is to be said, though I think it would be perhaps a good idea if you did a few quiet things on your own. Some things don't have to be announced, or maybe you can work with another person quietly, but the less noise the better. You're still thinking about what needs to be done. You still have your ambitions. So it's not like you're losing it's not like you're losing the plot. And also with the Sun square Pluto. I mean, if you really are spending too much time with other people, that Sun square Pluto, it could be annoying, and you're perhaps creating a situation where you are giving yourself things to worry about. So what I mean by that is if you spent the time, if you spent the day with the Sun square Pluto being very sociable, you could. But what that would mean is you'd be having to start to worry about what other people were saying, what other people were doing, what other people were planning, and your worries, I think, would be unreasonable. And so perhaps you shouldn't give yourself the opportunity to worry. Perhaps you should make some effort to restrict the information coming in so that you're only getting hold of the important information. There is still a temptation to micromanage if you give yourself a chance, and there are always things to worry about, particularly when it comes to money and what people are talking about when it comes to money and how it might affect you. But don't get too obsessed about it. I think that in most cases you can let things run in their own way. And one thing going on today is, well, not just today, but over the next couple of days, is that we've got a grand trine in water signs, and Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter. Mercury is also making a trine to Saturn. Now that Mercury trine Saturn is going to be exact over the weekend, but maybe you're starting to feel it. And with Mercury trine Saturn, you are slowly starting to have an understanding of other people, yes, but also perhaps an understanding of what's happening in the world. And Mercury trine Jupiter, Mercury trine Saturn is a reminder that Jupiter and Saturn are moving towards a trine aspect. Now, this trine aspect is not going to be exact this year. It looks as if they're coming to a trine. Look how close Jupiter is to Saturn. Less than 2 degrees apart. But Jupiter's slowing down. Jupiter is getting ready to go retrograde pretty soon, and so it never happens. But when you're talking about a Jupiter trine aspect, it's still in orb, even if it isn't exact. And Jupiter and Saturn are the chronocrators, the rulers of time. They're very much about the pace of the world. This constant balance between restriction and freedom. Economically, you might see recession and boom, and that may be another way of looking at Jupiter and Saturn. And you're starting to understand this, and it's starting to become clear. And with Mercury trine Jupiter, that may say something about your understanding of what's happening around you, and you can gain an understanding to some extent by talking to other people, but it can also be about what you observe, what you read in the news. And so it is becoming clear. And perhaps over the weekend, as Mercury makes that trine to Saturn, things will become even clearer, and perhaps you can start to really work things out in your own way. And that might be a good reason not to get too close to anyone else, to get sort of caught up in some mad social scene, because you would be distracted. You'd be too close to things, and there'd be all these inputs, and you just wouldn't know what was going on. But by having some distance, you gain knowledge, and you can really see how it's all working and how it all fits together. And I'll be talking more about that Mercury trine Saturn tomorrow when I do my forecasts for the weekend. Aquarius. The square aspect between the Sun and Pluto is, I think, quite important. I mean, this Sun square Pluto aspect doesn't last for too long. I mean, the Sun moves quite quickly. It'll still be around over the weekend, but then the Sun will move away from that square to Pluto. But this Sun square Pluto, it's in fixed signs, and of course Pluto is in Aquarius, and so it does very much highlight your ambitions. And I've been talking about your ambitions a lot recently, and I have to look at your chart I have to, in terms of your chart, I have to look at your chart, obviously, from the astrology. In terms of what I'm saying to you, all things being equal, you are an Aquarius. I have to look at your chart maybe in quite a general way, because obviously I don't have your time of birth, I don't have your date of birth, but all things being equal, with the Sun square Pluto, with all these also with all these planets in Scorpio, it should be a time where your ambitions are highly focused. Again, all things being equal, and I think that with this Sun square Pluto, this may be a time when you do have an opportunity to really focus on something. It is about focus, and it should ideally be quite single-minded. You don't want to get distracted, and at the same time it is about something maybe quite transformative. I mean, Pluto is a transformative influence. Pluto is in your own sign, and so you should not allow anything to hold you back. I know it's just a Friday. Maybe you can't do much on a Friday. It's just one day. But you can be aware of what you should be doing. You can make notes for the future with the Sun square Pluto. And so I would urge you, to give it everything you've got, particularly in terms of your work, if you have a job, or your business, whatever it is that's important to your ambitions. Okay, ambition is not just about job and work. It can be about something else in your life, whether it's voluntary, something you want to achieve, something you want to know, something you want to learn, something you want to be. And that might be the important point. Be. I mean, when we're talking about the 10th house, because from an Aquarian perspective, Scorpio is the 10th house. It's about ego development. It's about building who you are. And this is a time to be moving perhaps beyond the self into the ego. I mean, I know that might sound a bit strange. Maybe I've got the psychology a bit wrong there. But, really do think about the ego and what is important to you. And don't worry about it feeling overly materialistic. Sometimes it's okay to be materialistic. Sometimes it's okay to have concrete goals. So do give it your best shot. Now, this Sun square Pluto might also say something about relationships. The Sun is ruler of Leo, and Leo is your opposite sign. So it may not just be about your focus, it may also be about someone else's focus. So, don't assume that you're the only person with plans. That you're the only person who's got obsessions. It may be that someone else has obsessions. Maybe someone close to you has got obsessions. There are things that they really, really want to achieve. And you have to respect that, and also consider the possibility that your ideas about what you want may clash with someone else's, and this would be a particular problem if there was a conflict situation where there are winners and losers. So what happens when there are winners and losers? When it's a zero sum, when there's a competition, when there's only room for one person? Well, I would suggest with Sun square Pluto, if you are in a competitive situation, that you do tread carefully. It's not a situation where you're necessarily going to lose. I don't think you are going to lose if you handle it right, because you shouldn't forget that Aquarius, Saturn is your ruler, and Saturn is in mutual reception by exaltation to Venus. So in a conflict situation where there are winners and losers, you can get the better of another person, but you have to be very subtle. And in that case, if it really is a conflict situation, it's good to be single-minded, but an alternative approach might be useful. Doing something ever so slightly unexpected, making the most of that mutual reception between Venus and Saturn. And so perhaps I've contradicted myself. I've said it's important to be single-minded, to have a focus, but I would just moderate that if it was a competitive situation. In a competitive situation, you might have to come up with something extra, and I think you can. That's something you very much can do. Pisces. There is a trine between Mercury and Jupiter, and that trine between Mercury and Jupiter, as far as I'm concerned, is a pretty good aspect. Mercury is a planet that one can associate with the mind and with one's thoughts, and also with what we say. And it might be with this Mercury trine Jupiter that your mind is on good form. You're able to think cogently. You know what is important, and you can perhaps understand things that in the past may have been very difficult to get a grip of. And one reason this might have been difficult is perhaps because you were focusing on the wrong things. Perhaps you thought there was only one solution, and perhaps you've just been looking down instead of looking up. But with this Mercury trine Jupiter, this aspect allows you to think things through and understand, what needs to be done. And it's going to be very straightforward. It's not like some huge effort. It may just be quite obvious. And it all starts with who you are, what you're good at, and if you think about that, and you don't have to get involved with something that is completely incomprehensible. You don't have to learn anything new. You have the basic tools to come to a solution. So if you are grappling with a problem, particularly with a mental problem, you don't have to go out of your way to solve it. And in a way, the less effort you put in, the more likely it is that you will find a solution. And maybe you just have to remember who you are, the flow of being a Pisces. And there is a grand trine in water signs coming up. Well, it's kind of here. We've got Mercury trine Jupiter, Mercury trine Saturn. You also got Mars now moving towards a trine of Jupiter and Saturn. So that grand trine energy is just very easy. The solutions are there. They're available to you. You don't have to, go out of your way. And additionally, with Mercury trine Jupiter, it's an aspect that is very sociable. And so you don't have to go out of your way to find good company, to find people who are, on your wavelength, who you sympathize with. And as far as relationships are concerned, I think that this trine between Mercury and Jupiter does really facilitate contact at many different levels. That's certainly the mental level, but there's also the emotional level. Mercury and Jupiter, are in water signs, and Jupiter is in mutual reception to the Moon, because the Moon is in Sagittarius, and Jupiter is of course your ruler. So with the Moon and Jupiter being in each other's signs, that indicates that you can start to think about yourself and what you want to do, what's important to you, and it may be a Friday, but it's time to be thinking about what needs to be done, perhaps in terms of your own core ambitions. You have ideas. There are things you would like to do, things you would like to achieve. And while the Moon is in Sagittarius, the Moon will be in Sagittarius, not just today, but tomorrow, well, basically through the weekend. So when you think about the weekend, try to have a plan, because I think over the weekend you can accomplish quite a lot, and the things that you're working on now, you can perhaps see them through to a successful completion. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to turn to the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 8, which is holding together. I mean, this is a very sociable hexagram. It's about us, other people, us perhaps having some sort of common goal. Maybe on our own we can't necessarily achieve much, and perhaps we should be, seeking maybe alliances. I mean, I think that Greg Winkup, in his translation of the I Ching, he doesn't call this hexagram holding together. He calls it alliance or something like that. And so, who is going to be best for us? Who should we be hanging out with? Who should we be looking to support us? So if we need support, we should not be afraid to ask. And then, we do have two moving lines here, and bottom line moves and the third from the bottom moves. So the bottom line is, it's pretty fortunate. We just have to be sincere. We have to be sincere about who we are, what we want, what we're looking for. And if we have a sincere approach, then other people are going to respond accordingly. And that's a good place to start. But the question is, what happens if we pursue the matter? And the trouble is the third line moves. And the indication with the third line is that, we are right to be looking for support. But the trouble is we might look for support in the wrong areas. Now, when we looked at the astrology, I mentioned the fact there's a trine between Mercury and Jupiter. I think that Mercury-Jupiter trine is very good for looking for support. It's a very communicative aspect. But it seems that, it's a trine. It's maybe too easy to find support. People are going to be too willing to offer their help, offer their support. And that means we could get involved with the wrong people. And so it is better, I think, that we are alone than that we are holding together with people who really are not going to work for our best interests. So it's a difficult one. We should be looking for some kind of an alliance for support. And that's the right approach. But the reality is, we may not find what we're looking for. We might find that we're involved with people who don't have the commitment, or perhaps they're just egotistical. They may even be working against us. So there is a problem here, and I think that this is reflected also by the hexagram this moves to, because we've got two moving lines. We move to hexagram number 63, which is after completion, and it is a difficult hexagram. After completion gives us the idea of achieving something. We cross the river. It's always good to cross the river to get to the other bank. But then what happens? What happens when we get to the other bank? What happens when we achieve what we're looking for? Well, sure, going back to the previous hexagram, we might be looking for support, we might be looking for allies, but after completion, it indicates that there can be a breakdown, there can be chaos. And that often happens once we've moved to a next stage in our life. We think we've moved on. We think we're ready for the next phase, and we're not ready at all. We just haven't done enough preparation, and very soon things start to collapse and disintegrate. So I think overall today, it kind of looks good. We start the day being quite sensible, but somehow things just don't go right. And there's a real danger, that today does disintegrate into chaos. And it's better that we handle things alone, because we can trust ourselves, than that we take a chance. And I think it's certainly taking a chance on other people. It might seem to be the right thing to do, but in the end, things could become chaotic and we might end up feeling let down, and that shouldn't happen. So finally, I want to look at the square aspect between the Sun and Pluto. I don't think I'm going to spend very long on this aspect, but here is the aspect. So here we have it. This square between the Sun and Pluto happens today, 2:25 p.m. London time. So that means it'll happen in the morning. If you're in the Americas, it will happen, perhaps late this evening, if you're in Australia or New Zealand. And there we have it. Sun at 1 degree 24 Scorpio and Pluto at 1 degree 24 Aquarius. And with this Sun square Pluto, it can be quite obsessive. Particularly it's in fixed signs. And this is going to be the case because now that Pluto is in Aquarius, the hard aspects to Pluto will always be in fixed signs for the next few decades. So we better get used to it. And so it just may be a time of obsession, a time where people find it difficult to compromise. And once you decide you're going to do something, you just go through with it. You go through with it to the very end. And so perhaps the message with this Sun square Pluto is don't take things too seriously. I mean, it's good to be obsessed. It's good to be persistent. But if we're too persistent, we could take ourselves down a road that could be very dangerous because we just might not know when to stop, and that could be a problem. And there are perhaps other things that need to be considered, and maybe the power of this Sun square Pluto is intensified by the fact that there are other planets in Scorpio. We've got Mercury, we've got Mars and Mercury in Scorpio as well. So may not be about us. It may be about other people and how other people are behaving. And it may be with Sun square Pluto that compromise is difficult to find. Though in this case, the fact that the moon is moving into Sagittarius may soften things ever so slightly because the moon is, at least it's out of Scorpio, and it's it's in a mutable sign, and it's in mutual reception to Jupiter. And so maybe the obsessiveness of that Sun square Pluto is going to be mitigated by the moon moving through Sagittarius. And finally, I suppose it's a good idea to think about a few people who might be influenced by this Sun square Pluto. And the way to see a Sun-Pluto, the Sun and the Pluto transit is, if you like, is you start off with people who have Pluto aspecting a personal planet. And so, Pluto is a slow mover. So if you've got Pluto on your Sun or square your Mars or whatever, that aspect is, because Pluto is moving so slowly, it's going to last for weeks, could last for months. But when the Sun makes a square to Pluto, the Sun is acting as a kind of a detonator. It's acting as a trigger. And so I'm just going to be looking at a few people who have Pluto transits. I've already talked about these Pluto transits for some of these people. But in fact, I won't just talk about people. I will talk about two events, again, which I've talked about before, and two events which had happened in the past, which could be influenced by the Sun square Pluto. Is firstly, there is the wedding of Harry and Meghan. So they got married on May the 19th, 2018. And there have been sort of constant talk about the rifts within the relationship, how the relationship is just not going anywhere, how they're stuck with each other, how they don't get on with each other. I don't know. I mean, I kind of get a bit bored with the matter, but we can't avoid the fact that when Harry and Meghan got married, there was a Mars-Uranus square. Mars was at 1:15 Aquarius, Uranus was at 1 degrees 12 Taurus. Now, that aspect says something about their relationship, but it might also say something about the impact of their relationship, not just on them, but on everyone else. Clearly, Harry and Meghan and their relationship has been very disruptive. And so that Mars-Uranus square may simply be talking about the disruption that has caused to the royal family, to attitudes to the royal family, and it's clearly certainly from a social media perspective, it has been very disruptive. But it might also say something about the relationship itself. There could be potentially something quite stormy about this relationship. And so Pluto is conjunct the wedding Mars. I mean, Pluto is actually moving away from the Mars, but Pluto is a slow mover. And so today, with the Sun moving to the square of Mars, well, the Sun is going to be on opposition there, Uranus, and so this Sun square Pluto could be a day when, I don't know, we don't know, we'll probably never know, but who knows what the contact is like between Harry and Meghan with this Sun square Pluto. It could really stir up one of the fault lines in their marriage, that Mars square Uranus that was around, at the moment they did get married. And turning to politics, there is the inauguration of Donald Trump. Now, when a president gets elected in the modern era, I think in the 30s, one switched from a March the 4th inauguration to a January the 20th inauguration. So when a president gets elected in the modern era, the sun is at around 1 degree Aquarius. So with Pluto at around 1 degree Aquarius, Pluto is going to be making conjunctions to the inauguration sun, and this is what is happening. It's there, and also it kind of, the inauguration sun, it's a Pluto return, and a Pluto return, you think, oh, you have to wait 248 years for a Pluto return. Well, not necessarily, because of retrograde movement. The inauguration is about to have a Pluto return. So the Sun-Pluto conjunction in Donald Trump's inauguration chart, I've gone for the January 20th at noon, which is legally when the new president takes office. So Pluto is hitting that Sun-Pluto conjunction. That's happening all the time. And we can see the dramas in the White House, Trump wanting to assert himself, wanting to demonstrate his power, for example, on the streets of Chicago or Portland or wherever. I'm not commenting on that. I'm not going to give my view one way or another. And of course, he's got his international issues, his struggles with Russia and Ukraine. And I think that the general consensus is increasingly that he is a bit out of his depth there. But he does get annoyed. He wants the thing to be resolved. And now we have the Sun square Pluto. So Sun is square Pluto. Sun is acting as a trigger for Pluto on his Sun Uranus. No, not his. It's for the inauguration. We're talking about his regime. So that Sun square Pluto could very much affect the Trump regime, and it is a reminder that he is coming up, that the Trump regime is coming up for the Pluto return. So when is the exact date of the Pluto return of the Trump regime? Is going to be on, the precise date, I think, is about November the 19th. So in less than a month, the Trump regime will have its Pluto return. And then just a few people who may be affected by Sun square Pluto. Again, people I've already talked about. Donald Tusk, Prime Minister of Poland. He has the Sun. He has an incredible T-square. Sun conjunct Venus in Taurus. He has Moon square the Sun. He's got Moon opposition Uranus, and so the Sun is really making the Grand Cross. So he's got a Grand Cross in his chart anyway, and so Neptune opposition Sun Venus, Neptune square Uranus square Moon. Grand Cross, I mean, people talk about a lot in astrology. Grand Cross is a relatively rare, unless you use a lot of outer planets or you use very wide orbs. But we can say for sure that Donald Tusk has a Grand Cross, and I don't know if we've fully seen the potential of that Grand Cross. But him having the Sun conjunct Neptune, and Pluto, on his moon, and Pluto square his sun, opposition his Uranus. I don't know about Polish politics, but there would seem to be things going on, and he really is having to use his power, and there could be real pressures on him that I'm not aware of, but maybe things are happening in Poland that are really having an impact on Donald Tusk. And on another note, Zoran Mamdani, who is apparently about to be elected mayor of New York. There has been a view that if the third Republican candidate would drop out, that could dramatically impact the election and would allow Cuomo to win. But as far as I know, the betting odds suggest that Mamdani is going to win. And Zoran Mamdani does have a Mercury-Mars conjunction in his horoscope. And so he's got the Sun at the moment on his Mercury-Mars conjunction, and he's got Pluto. Well, he's got Saturn. He's got Pluto on his Saturn. He's got the Sun on his Mercury-Mars. So this Sun-Pluto square really does have an influence on Zoran Mamdani. It's just before the election campaign. Just before the election. And so maybe on Friday there will be an event that could have a bearing on his election. And he would probably, if I was his astrologer, I would advise him to be very careful on Friday, and to be careful about what he says and what he does and where he goes to. So he may be someone who, over the next couple of days, has a certain amount of prominence. And aside from that, Virginia Giuffre, she's dead, of course. And she's been dead for some time. But her autobiography, her posthumous autobiography, came out, and this has been quite dramatic, her talking about Epstein. And of course, this has not been good for Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew has been, under the microscope, and he's lost his titles. And maybe I should look at Prince Andrew again. I think I looked at him quite recently. But just because you're dead doesn't mean that your chart stops working. And so you could say that the Sun is on her IC at the moment, and the Sun on the IC is something very hidden, and it's perhaps is about speaking from the dead, and having Pluto square her MC and square her IC is almost bringing her to life. And you think about Sun square Pluto, sort of regeneration, and what is her purpose? Perhaps her purpose at some level was to really undermine the establishment, and to perhaps show how sick the establishment was. And so I think it's perhaps quite interesting that this Sun square Pluto is hitting Virginia Giuffre's horoscope, and particularly in particular her midheaven, to a lesser extent her Saturn. She's got Saturn on the IC. So this is perhaps a reminder that when you're dead, that doesn't mean that your chart stops working. So that's it. That's all I'm going to say about Sun square Pluto. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.